Tranquility Base here. The Eagle has landed.
Hi, I'm Angela. I like anime, so anyway, let's talk about it. So, Grave of the Fireflies. A quick trigger warning for pretty much just themes about death and devastation and war, because this movie isn't a light movie, even though it's a Studio Ghibli movie, and in my head personally, which might have been wrong from my impression of Studio Ghibli, so they do like fun, light-hearted children's movies, and although this is I would say it's a movie that anyone could watch, I still put viewer discretion because there are a lot of dark themes that never really go away, even when people are having fun in this movie. But regardless, it is a historical drama which follows the lives of two children, Seita and Setsuko, after World War II right up to the end of World War II and a little bit after World War II had ended. At the beginning of the story, we are exposed to the bold statement that Seita says, that is, September 21st, 1945. That was the night that I died. So at the beginning of this movie, we are exposed to the ending. We know what's going to happen at the end, which settles in, for me at least at first, this sense of foreboding. And the colours in this movie aren't necessarily bright, especially at the beginning, until we see like bits of Seita's ghost, because from that point onwards, we know as an audience that we are following Seita's ghost, and everything we are watching is sort of a memory. I mean, it took me a while to realise that these are memories, but everything we're watching is a memory. And we know that it's going to end badly, hence foreboding. But when we see Seita's lifeless body in the train station, we then see a man or two men walk up to the body, and we also see that Seita's body is surrounded by other dead young boy or children's bodies, which shows that even grown men don't even have sympathy for dying children. And even when he's sat at the station before he's about to die, people are shouting or saying derogatory terms at them, which I probably should have looked up the historical meaning behind some of those derogatory terms. But from my perspective, I'm kind of assuming that in a post-war society, a lot of people didn't have homes to go to, so there were just a lot of displaced people, and the richer or the more privileged people in Japanese society didn't like that there were just these, in their probably eyes, ugly, smelly, homeless people and children around. So to them, they were more of an eyesore rather than somebody who needed to be helped. And it also alludes to this kind of theme, or one of the main themes in the story, which is, even though there were so many people around, so many people that could have helped Seita and Setsuko throughout the entire movie, even right until his death, nobody helped him. Everybody or helped him to the degree that would have actually saved him. Because I say nobody helps him, but even in the opening scenes, we see somebody give him the last rice bowl that they probably had for lunch or something, but that wasn't enough to save him. And even if you do something nice for somebody, that's not enough to save him. So even the people walking by him were basically condemning him to death by doing nothing and just walking by this poor child who was dying. And maybe he was too far gone past the point of saving, Setsuko later in the movie, but that's not really the point. The point is that nobody tried to help. Well, moving along, when the men search Seita's lifeless body, they pick up a sweets tin. I had a hard time figuring out what it was at the beginning, but you find out later, so it doesn't really matter. But they pick up the sweets tin. Oh, I also forgot to mention spoilers for the movie, if that wasn't obvious already, but sorry, this far in. What I was going to say is, when the soldiers pick up a sweets tin from Seita, they ask the other soldier, "Oh, what should I do with this?" And it's just chuck it, so he throws it away. And at the beginning, we don't really know what significance this has, but rewatching that scene after watching the entire movie, is heartbreaking, because even before then, even before you know what the significance of the sweets tin was, you knew, or at least I thought, that if somebody in their dying moments or throughout their horrible life held on to this one thing, it must have been incredibly important to them. So chucking it away just felt awful. Like, where's the sympathy? Moving along, when the like worker throws away Seta's sweets tin, that's when we like see his ghost pick it up, and his ghost is with Setsuko. So we also know that at this point Setsuko is dead, and we also kind of know Setsuko's dead because when you go back into the memories, Setsuko is with him all the time, but he died alone, which tells the viewer that if Setsuko isn't with him when he's dying, Setsuko has died, because he would never leave his sister like alone to go to a place like this to die. Well, another main theme of the story, which I thought whilst looking at the entire story, was that this movie, Grave of the Fireflies, isn't just about Seta and Setsuko. Sorry if you can hear any noise in the background. You might not be able to hear the noise in the background, I don't know, but sorry. This movie is about everyone who suffered during World War II, towards the end of World War II, and after World War II. You could say even it more focuses on post-war and its effects, because even though the war is over, he still couldn't manage to survive. Like, there was nothing he could do even though the war was over, because he was parentless and moneyless and didn't have anyone to turn to, supposedly. Interestingly, I'm going to skip on to like the beginning of his memories. Interestingly, at the beginning of the memories, they use, I should have also googled this, Seta ties Setsuko to his back using this like cloth ribbon kind of method thing, which I think is interesting, because it kind of reminds me to tie Setsuko to his back, because it kind of reminds me of how it's probably not like just in Nigeria, but in Nigeria there's like this way that you like tie children to your back using like, you use like a full-on cloth though, you don't just use like a ribbon kind of thing. But I thought it just kind of reminded me of my childhood there. All motifs of innocence, and another idea in this movie is innocence being untimely ripped away. I remember being Macbeth, let me not laugh. Innocence being untimely ripped from these children by force, and there was nothing they can do about it, because war at the end of the day causes children and people to lose, or children primarily, to lose their innocence and not be able to enjoy their childhood. And in any way in this movie that they try to enjoy their childhood or be kids, people look down on them because there's a war going on and they must contribute to the war effort, even though they are kids. They're children. How do you want children to contribute to a war that they didn't even want, they didn't start, and they thought that their country was going to win, you know? And that was a dig at the aunt, because later on. Anyway, the movie's sort of like, in the memories, we start with an air raid. That's why Seta has to tie Setsuko to his back, because there's an air raid going on. And I wrote here, which, watch for lie, when the bombs start falling from the sky, I wrote that they don't even really look like bombs and they're not explosives, they just kind of look like fire rods. And I did some research on them, and this is called firebombing, which was a tactic used by the Allied forces in World War II to cause damage to mainly urban areas and causes fire to spread, which is what causes damage to urban areas. So it's not really an explosive, it's more of like, well, it is, but like it's fire, not like bombs. And these predominantly happened in the last 6 months of World War II, because I think, because I remember reading about this, a lot of damage, a lot of manufacturing was done privately, so there weren't so by bombing individual cities, it really hurt like Japanese economy and stuff like that, which is, I guess, useful in a war, but it also killed between 241,000 people to 900,000 people. So, okay. And also I'd like to add that Grave of the Fireflies is based off a book that was published in 1967, which is a semi-autobiographical by the author Akiyuki no Saka, based off the fire bombings that happened in 1945 in Kobe and the loss of his which caused the loss of his little sister. So he wrote Grave of Fireflies about this, or in Japanese, Hotaru no Haka. But anyway, then later on, they don't manage to get to the shelter, but they do manage to hide somewhere, and so they survive the air raid in their city. But then something about black rain, which I also thought black rain is a cause of dust particles going into the air and mixing with the rain. So when it rains, it will rain black. Sometimes it will be red. The pollution. But then once they've survived the air raid from their town, they look and they see utter devastation, and it looks hopeless. It looks like they'll never bounce back from this, and you could say in some ways they never really did. And you'll notice like horrible injury. The imagery in this movie exposes the viewer to horror. You see burnt bodies, you see people on stretchers, you see blood, you see their mum later on with horrible burns. Even though she's bandaged up, you can see all the horrible burns on her body and how she's not going to survive from this. And the mum dies subsequently of these injuries, of the burns. But Seita doesn't want Setsuko to know about this, so he lies to Setsuko, saying that the mom went to the big hospital in the city, like in I don't know, the next biggest city, and that she'll be okay and we can visit her one day. But she died. And to be fair, they don't tell us, like the viewer, that she died, but it's kind of implied that she's died. But like it's confirmed, like I would say in two instances, like later when Setsuko finally finds out that she died via the aunt, and also when Seita has like a box presumably full of the mum's ashes, and he's on the train to go meet their aunt. But yeah, on to the next thing. Also remember how I said that this was about post-war? Seita, I don't know if I said this already, but Seita died on September 21st, 1945. I've said that. But officially, World War II ended on August 15th, 1945, when Japan surrendered. But it might have not been like fully over until the 2nd of September in 1945. Maybe that was when all the legal documents and everything had been signed. But like I said, regardless, he died after they lost the war. And I don't even know if Japan losing the war is what's really important here, because even in most post-war societies, whether you win or lose, there's devastation, and many people can't get back on their feet because of the loss of food, the loss of money, the loss of water, the loss of like environment and homes, and everything is destroyed. So even if you win, at least I think, I don't know, scholarly, I'm not a scholar, even if you win, it will still take a lot to rebuild, and the poorest people in society are the ones affected the most, because they don't have the money or the resources, or they don't have any backup or contingency plans. Like, this is all they had and it's gone. Which shows, like, as soon as the air raid on Seita's town happens, it's a downhill spiral. Like, there's nothing that they could really come back from. Even though the dad was part of the Navy, again, like, there's little that did for them in the entire story. It's not like the dad sent any money back. Presumably the dad could have died at the beginning of the story, because maybe I wasn't observant enough, but we don't know, at least I think, when the story started. Like, when, because the story, I don't know if the story started before, I'm assuming the story started before Japan surrendered. But so then the dad could have been dead already, because in the last couple months leading up to Japan surrender, Pearl Harbor happened, I think. I should probably have searched this. Pearl Harbor happened, which caused the nuclear bombings in Japan. And also, I think somebody says later in the film that all the Japanese sinks were sunk. So the dad had been dead, but I don't know when. But anyway, now that the mum had died, whether Seta realised or not, they were orphans at this point in time. But he realises later on that the mum died at the school, and then they went back to their old home to get the food that she'd stored. And I said that they had no contingency plan, because they didn't really, but they had some light of hope, which I would say is better than probably a lot of people had in the war. Like, a lot of people didn't have any, like, sort of backup, but they had, I guess, backup food. And later on we find out that they had, like, I think it's 7,000, the mum had 7,000 yen in her bank account. But again, that didn't last for very long. Okay, moving along. Maybe I should have cited when this was, but I wrote this chronologically because I wrote this as I was watching the movie. But I wrote, he went to his old home and got food, Then him and his sister saw a ton of fireflies, which kind of reminds me of Hotel de Luna, which I just finished watching, because in Hotel de Luna, the fireflies are a very significant motif, but I'm not talking about Hotel de Luna right now. But you can see, like, because Seta and Setsuko have to move in with their, like, distant aunt on their dad's side. Distant, I don't know if it's distant, they just say distant, but I don't know. Anyway, to move in with their aunt, and you can see from the moment that they move in that the aunt treats them worse and treats her quote-unquote, her own family better. Like, she gives them more, like, actual rice, whilst Seta and Setsuko get more, like, soup, and soup, like, is mostly water. So she's basically just giving them water and maybe a couple vegetables and not that much rice, while she's giving her own, so her daughter and her husband, more actual rice. And then, even though there are moments of happiness, for example, in the next scene when they go to the beach, there's still constant foreboding, and that's going to be my word of the day, foreboding. Because when they go to the beach, it's still inescapable, the war and the poverty and the devastation. Because when they go to the beach, there are people collecting salt because they're running out of salt, which again shows you how much people are actually suffering in this war. And then they're like run on the beach and they're having a bunch of fun, and you could say, oh wow, Seta's like a really good big brother. Then when Setsuko's walking on the beach, they see a dead body, like, covered up, but they see the feet of a dead man, and Setsuko's like, what's that? And she's like, don't look at that. Which shows that even when, like I said earlier, in this society specifically, everybody wants to look away and nobody wants to help everyone. Seta is also a product of that society, so naturally, even though he's trying to protect his sister, he's doing the exact same thing that everybody else is doing, which led him and his sister to eventually their demise, their death. Because, I mean, I could say this is human nature, but also of, like, a part of Japanese, I don't know, culture. I'm not a Japanese scholar, obviously I can't say too much about Japanese society, but they do have a culture of groupism and doing what's best for the group. But then also in war times, it's more about individualism, because you have to do what's good for you and your family. And in this case, not thinking about this dead man on the beach is better for Seta and his, like, you could say his mini group, which is him and his sister. The aunt definitely shows her true colours when the aunt is all like, let's sell the mother's old, I'm going to say kimonos, but they do look like silk, maybe cloths, but I think they're her old kimonos. And Setsuko is crying. Setsuko's like, no, those are moms. And throughout this movie you see Seta's ghost. And at this point, when Setsuko is crying, Seta's ghost recoils. He's absolutely disgusted. And when I first watched this, I interpreted it as he's disgusted at himself for letting Setsuko cry like that. But when I was doing some research on this and what other people thought of it, some people thought that scene was Seta crying at the horrible decision he had made to sell his mother's silks. Because in the end, his aunt, you could say, I don't know, scammed them, swindled them, which is brought up later, because they got a whole ton of rice, and rice was scarce in the war, but it's a staple carbohydrate in Japan. So, I feel like, though, I would have done the same thing. Maybe I would have kept one of her silks, though, like one of her kimonos. I would have kept one of those for, like, Setsuko when she's older, like the same way that they kept the ring from the mother. Alright? Yeah, they get money out of the mum's account, but that doesn't even seem to last long. And 7,000 yen. But obviously this is war. This is 1945. money is different back then. Inflation, isn't it, low? So I don't know how much that would actually be worth nowadays. So I can't say whether that's a lot or a little bit of money. Alright, okay, I said this earlier, but I wrote, though we want to empathize with Zeta, the story is a reflection of many stories and what happened to people during the war. Like, throughout the entire movie, maybe you don't wonder, but they are constantly showing us other people, like when people are on stretchers back in the air raid in the town, you're like wondering what will happen to these people at the school, you're like what will happen to these people, like, or what has happened to these people. Like when you see the dead man on the beach, you're like, okay, what has happened to this guy to lead him to death, you know what I mean? Like, there's a constant reminder in this movie that this isn't just about Seta and Setsuko. Seta and Setsuko are one tragic story out of this entire product of war and post-war. But the aunt got nearly nasty, so they left and went to live in the shelter. It's like when Setsuko was crying, the aunt kept saying stuff like, you guys contribute nothing to this war and you think that you deserve the same food as like my daughter who's going to school and learning, and my husband who, I don't know what he did, but he goes out and works and makes money, I guess. But one thing I'd like to say is when Seta said he didn't have any money, there were no schools for him to go to. So what does she expect him to do? He's already said that he can't go to school. And Setsuko, of course, is too young, and it feels like in some ways you could empathize with her because she's like, she just randomly had to take in these two children and they don't really do much in her eyes. But empathy, please? Sympathy, please? Like, come on, love. It's like, we can, I don't know. Anywho. So yeah, they end up leaving, and in some people's eyes, when they left the aunt's house, this was their inevitable condemnation to death, because they left the system that quote unquote was supposed to protect them and went outside it to live on their own, to forage for their own, which gave them freedom, initial happiness if you must. But at the end of the day, the system in some way, even if it's a bad system, protects and guarantees stability. Living outside the system does not guarantee stability, but non-guaranteed stability is freedom. So really the choice was between a bad situation but stability, or freedom and instability. And in the end, Seta chose freedom, which he thought was for the betterment of Setsuko. But in the end, it turned out not to be for the betterment of Setsuko. But again, he's only a child himself. How old? I'm not really sure. But let's just assume he's like in his mid-teens, so like 15. Maybe he could be as old as 16. Don't know. I wouldn't think so. I would have thought he was like 13 or something. But anyway, regardless, Setsuko seems to be scratching her back, and I thought this was going to be like a terminal illness, or like, oh, she had like a really, really terrible illness that she was going to die from. But in the end, not really. But then the one thing that happens is when they're living on their own, they just get the idea to capture a bunch of fireflies and like let them loose in their like little house thing, and then they see the beauty of these fireflies lighting up their little house that they made themselves. But the next morning when they wake up, the fireflies are dead, which shows the short-lived beauty of fireflies in the same way the short-lived beauty of youth, the short-lived beauty of happiness, because Setsuko makes a grave with those fireflies and is all like, this is the grave for the mum since she doesn't have a grave. And here is when Seta breaks down crying, because he's realized that all the decisions he's made up to now have been for the betterment of Setsuko. Setsuko. But it didn't work in the end because he tried to lie and the aunt just told her anyway. And he doesn't necessarily blame the aunt, but he's just realised that he's failed. And this is only the beginning of his failures. But they had to resort to theft, and he gets caught and beat up by this farmer. And earlier on, actually, so there are two main farmers. There's the farmer who he tries to like trade stuff with and sell stuff with, and after a while that farmer is like, oh, I'm sorry, I can't sell you any more things. And this is where I talk about when I was doing research and I was watching a couple of videos. I'm not trying to steal people's points, but one thing that I'll say is that maybe this movie kind of forces you to think about who is responsible for Seta and Setsuko's death. And I personally would say everybody but nobody, because in the same way everyone's responsible for everyone else as spectacles in it, at the same time nobody is responsible for anyone else, because in this post-war and war society everyone is looking out for themselves. And even Seta and Setsuko are looking out for themselves. When they start stealing, they're not concerned about who would need this food and who might not get food because they're trying to steal food. They're just thinking about, we need to survive. And the first farmer says that, oh, you should go back to the aunt, you should go back to the woman who was giving you food, because it's better, because I think he was trying to say that it's better to be part of the broken system where you have stability rather than two children living on their own, fending for themselves out in the wild, which is why they need to resort to theft in the end. But when he gets caught, the other farmer beats him up, no sympathy, and is like, oh, I'm taking you to the police. And when he gets to the police, again, the police does nothing to help him, besides from offer him a glass of water. And this links back to how at the beginning I said nobody helped, or nobody helped to a significant degree. Sure, the police officer let him off for stealing, and offered to give him water, but that wasn't enough to save their lives. It was simply a kind of useless act of kindness that proved not very useful to Seta or Setsuko. But yeah, he continues stealing from people after that, and he puts his life in danger again for Setsuko. He goes during air raids to people's houses and steals cloves, food, pots, bowls, things like that he can use or he can sell for money, or he can just eat if he takes food. But when he tries to sell these, again, nobody wants to buy them. Like, they can either tell they're stolen or they're just kind of useless. So then, I don't even know how they managed this. Maybe he saved up maybe he used some of the mom's money, or some of the money he'd been using, he'd gotten from stealing things. But he went to a doctor, and the doctor looked at Setsuko and was all like, all she needs is food. She's malnourished. That's the only thing that's wrong with her, which I was quite surprised with, because I was like, does malnourishment really cause a rash like that? But regardless, that again is useless, because as Seta screams at him, where is he supposed to find food? There is no food. There's nothing for anyone, for no one. And his sister, this child, is dying because the system that I guess they chose to leave failed them. And there was no food. Nothing. Anyway, so then he goes to take out, I think, more money from his mum's bank account. And this is when he finds out that Japan has surrendered. And it happened a while ago, presumably because when he hears about this, he's surprised, but everybody else around him isn't surprised. Everybody else is just like, what? You didn't know? And this is when he finds out his father is most likely dead, so he's an orphan now. And once he's done that, he goes to buy some watermelon, and then he goes back to the little cave thing where him and Setsuko lives. And he gives Setsuko some watermelon. She's lying on her back, and she kind of looks a bit lifeless. But she eats some of the watermelon, but she never wakes up again. And since he's dead and narrating it, him and Setsuko can finally be together in whatever afterlife, presumably, that I think exists. So we don't really know what happened to him after Setsuko died. I feel like there's just a gap between Setsuko's death and seeing him in the train station. But I think ultimately it doesn't matter, because Setsuko's death, let me finish my point. Ultimately it doesn't matter because he had nothing left to live for anymore. He lived solely to look after Setsuko, but after her death there was nothing for him, nothing at all, no reason for him to keep on fighting, because his parents were dead, Setsuko was dead, There was nobody for him to turn to, so what was the point in living? Even after Setsuko's death, he has to cremate her by himself, and he takes some of her ashes and he puts them in the sweets tin that Setsuko so loved throughout the entire movie. Even when it was empty, they made the most of those sweets. Even like putting water in it to try and get the sweet water out, just so Setsuko could enjoy it. But in the end, happiness was fleeting, just like that tin of sweets, and he tried to hold on to it as long as possible, just like that tin of sweets. But Setsuko died, and he died with his ashes in his hands. But when this brings us back to the beginning, because when the workers throw away that sweets tin, you can see that some of Setsuko's ashes fall out of the sweets tin, and they basically threw away a child's life, and didn't care about the child who just died in front of them. But at the end of the day, this is a product of war, and there is still a sort of distance placed between the viewer and Setsuko and Seita, because for people like me who couldn't even imagine what war must be like, the devastation, the tragedy, everything that must have happened during war, there's still a sort of distance because I don't fully understand it. But for older people, maybe, this is why I say this is a good movie for any ages, but for older people, maybe this is possibly a reminder. And this movie isn't very long. This movie is only 1 hour and 28 minutes long, and in this short time they expose us to so many themes and make us think about and remember all the people who died and suffered during the war, even like the losing side of the war, But if I look at my little history section, strategic bombings in June 1944 till the end of the war, American bombs Japan in retaliation for Pearl Harbor, pretty much said everything in this history bit. But yeah, overall, I would say Grave of Fireflies is a beautiful masterpiece. War pieces can be done, I feel like, just good or bad. You can have a good war piece or you can have a bad war piece. Bad war pieces are usually insensitive, over-dramatized, sensationalized, yada yada yada. It just feels insensitive. Good war pieces are thoughtful, thought-provoking, have empathy and sympathy for the people involved in the war. And it's, what's that saying? I don't know. History, like, if you don't learn about history, it repeats itself. History repeats itself, that's the saying. But, like, I would say without education, history repeats itself if you don't know. So that's why I think it's very important to learn about world history, not just the history of your own country. Cough, cough. The British education system, but you could say all education systems only really teach people about their own history. And I didn't do GCSE history, so I can't say anything. But the history I learned up to year 9, which is compulsory, that's only British history. I don't think I learned anything about any other type of history. Same with the literature in the British, in British literature. It's all British literature, which is kind of boring, but that's not the point of this movie. Grave of Fireflies has this innate juxtaposition even in its name. Grave, so death, the end, and Firefly, something pretty, something beautiful, something with light that brings light. But even at the end of the movie, you see Setsuko and Seita together, which is, I've forgotten the word for it. I'm just going to say bittersweet, because everybody around him and in his life died. Strangely though, you don't see the parents. You'd think, you'd see the parents. But no, maybe because it only mattered that he got to see Setsuko in the end, and Setsuko had always been with him, but I don't know about that. Because it seemed like he loved his parents as well, like that scene when they're in that photo. But we could go all day about why the parents aren't really there. But either way, thank you for listening to this episode about Grave of Fireflies. It's quite a sad is probably an understatement, movie. But I've been watching like a lot of comedy, a lot of funny stuff lately. So watching something more sad and thought-provoking has been more interesting because I feel like I can make more informed points about it and do more research about it, especially when it's like a topic about war. But nevertheless, it's been a hoot. I'll do my update, I guess. You don't have to listen to this, but I'll do my update anyway. I don't know if by the time this comes out I would have redesigned the logo, and maybe I'll find a better way to do my YouTube channel, so maybe that will change as well. I've had a lot of fun making this podcast. By the time this comes out, it'll be a while from now. Summer is fully in swing now. It's almost time for the summer of like normal school children to like finish, which means you'll see children everywhere. Now, the heat wave just happened, which was excruciating. I'm very glad it's over. I'm actually sorry for anyone who like lived in like a really big hot city. I mean, it did get to like 41 degrees here, but I'm not London. And London got really, really hot. But all I know is thank you so much for listening. So anyway, bye.
Tranquility Base here. The Eagle has landed.